Welcome back to Dark Mondays with Kevin Bozeman. I'm Kevin Bozeman. Dark Mondays is a weekly podcast that explores how theater reflects and challenges the world beyond the stage. And this week, I'm back to the regularly scheduled program. I went a little off course last week in many ways, and I'm glad I did. I got some really beautiful messages from folks who were moved by the episode, who were very complimentary about my storytelling, and who were, I think, inspired by my transparency. My friend Melissa said that episode should have come with a disclaimer because she was not expecting to cry like that. And that episode was even a surprise for me. No editing, me stuttering and stumbling through it. Since I was a kid, people have commented on how well I speak. I don't think I speak that well. There are so many people whose speech I envy, whose vocabulary, whose storytelling and use of analogy and metaphor I envy, and I aspire to their eloquence. But I have been told that I speak well for so long that I take great pride in that. I was on my high school speech and debate team. Anyone else do speech and debate out there? It feels like one of those theater kid related things. At least it was in my high school. I also did oratorical contests through my church. Those were mostly dramatic recitations of poems or monologues or dialogues. I did a dialogue, a dramatic interpretation from Fences by August Wilson. Most people did poems. I did a poem called The Creation by the great American writer and activist James Weldon Johnson. And God stepped out on space, and he looked around and said, I'm lonely. I'll make me a world. And far as the eye of God could see, darkness covered everything, blacker than 100 midnights down in a cypress swamp. Then God smiled, and the light broke, and the darkness rolled up on one side, and the light stood shining on the other. And God said, that's good. Then God reached out and took the light in his hands, and God rolled the light around in his hands until he made the sun. And he set that sun ablazing in the heavens, and the light that was left from making the sun, God gathered it up in a shining ball and flung it against the darkness, spangling the night with moon and stars. Then down between the darkness and the light, he hurled the world. And God said, that's good. Then God himself stepped down, and the sun was on his right and the moon was on his left. The stars were clustered about his head, and the earth was under his feet. And God walked, and where he trod, his footsteps hollowed the valleys out and bulged the mountains up. Then he stopped and looked and saw that the earth was hot and barren. So God stepped over to the edge of the world, and he spat out the 7 seas. He batted his eyes, and the lightnings flashed. He clapped his hands, and the thunders rolled, and the waters above the earth came down. The cooling waters came down. Then the green grass sprouted, and the little red flowers blossomed. The pine tree pointed his finger to the sky, and the oak spread out his arms. The lakes cuddled down in the hollows of the ground, and the rivers ran down to the sea. And God smiled again, and the rainbow appeared and curled itself around his shoulder. Then God raised his arm, and he waved his hand over the sea and over the land, and he said, bring forth, bring forth. And quicker than God could drop his hand, fishes and fowls and beasts and birds swam the rivers and the seas, roamed the forest and the woods, and split the air with their wings. And God said, that's good. Then God walked around, and he looked around on all that he made. He looked at his sun, and he looked at his moon, and he looked at his little stars. He looked on his world with all its living things, and God said, I'm lonely still. Then God sat down. On the side of a hill where he could think, by a deep, wide river, he sat down. With his head in his hands, God thought and thought, till he thought, I'll make me a man. Up from the bed of the river, God scooped the clay, and by the bank of the river, he kneeled him down. And there, the great God Almighty, who lit the sun and fixed it in the sky, who flung the stars to the most far corner of the night, who rounded the earth in the middle of his hand, this great God, like a mammy bending over her baby, kneeled down in the dust, toiling over a lump of clay till he shaped it in his own image. Then into it he blew the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Amen. Amen. That's from God's Trombones, a collection of poems by James Weldon Johnson. All that to say, I was memorizing and reciting poems like that when I was 12 and have spoken publicly for a long time and always felt a sense of accomplishment or pride, like I said, for speaking well. I spoke at an event earlier this year, presented an award, and someone came up to me after and said, "You don't like speaking in public, do you?" And this was someone I've known for a long time, but I don't think they're aware of my long history of public speaking. It kind of threw me. But maybe I seemed nervous that night. I don't know. I don't remember feeling particularly nervous. At one point, I considered studying broadcast journalism. So having Dark Mondays feels a little like doing broadcast journalism. This is absolutely not journalism, though. Don't ever say I said it was. I'm just another talking head with a mic. Even though this is not journalism, I would still like to offer 2 corrections to statements I made in previous episodes. I'm talking like I have a full season of episodes. There are only 2 episodes. In episode 1, I said that Hannah Einbender received the 2024 Human Rights Campaign Visibility Award for expanding LGBTQ plus representation on and off screen, when in fact she was the 2025 recipient. I did catch that right after publishing that episode and added the correction at the end of episode 1's transcript. Then last week in episode 2, I told the story about choreographing the hip hop inspired musical How to Break at the Village Theater. I said in the Syracuse area, but I meant Seattle, another lovely American city that starts with an S. The Village Theater is in Issaquah, Washington, an adorable little town with a delightful theater about half an hour from Seattle, Washington. I love when newspapers issue a correction. So this is me putting on my editor of the newspaper hat and issuing a correction. Did I mention that Dark Mondays with Kevin Bozeman is conceived, written, and produced by me? That means I'm doing everything. Also, any story I tell is as I recall it. I'm currently in week 8 of a 10-week creative nonfiction writing class at Gotham Writers Workshops. We meet in person for 3 hours on every Wednesday, except last week because of Thanksgiving. I hope you had a good one if you celebrated. The class is a memoir class. This is my first class at Gotham, but I've taken 3 other memoir workshops at the Unterberg Poetry Center at the 92nd Street Y. And according to the online etymology dictionary, the word memoir comes from the French word mémoire, which means memory. It traces back to the Latin word memoria. It has evolved from an early 15th century meaning of written record to the modern definition of a nonfiction account of personal memories from a specific period or event in an author's life. So I could write a memoir about my point of view of my experience at the Hollywood Walk of Fame, which could be a different account from my brother's, even though we were at the same event, because memory is unreliable, it's malleable, it's subjective. So any story I tell on Dark Mondays is as I recall it in the moment. One of the wonderful writing tools we are encouraged to employ is to show the unreliable quality of memory, to say upfront to the reader things like, this is the conversation as I recall it, or I don't know exactly what she said, but I imagine it was something like. This is me saying the stories I share on Dark Mondays are as accurate to my recollection of what was said where it was said, who said it, and how, etc., as I can possibly be. And when I make mistakes, and I will, I'll come back and correct them if I catch them. I'm wearing all the hats here, remember? Or you'll point out the mistakes to me. Gently, though. Gently. Did you see Wicked for Good? I saw it. I loved it. I'll see it again while it's still in the theater, probably this week. I won't go too deep into it because I just watched the first time to experience it, to enjoy it. And I did thoroughly enjoy it. I grew up on movie musicals, which I'm sure sparked my interest in musical theater. So I always anticipate Hollywood's adaptations of Broadway musicals. And sometimes Hollywood gets it wrong, but when Hollywood gets it right, it's magical. And in my opinion, John M. Chu got it right. I sent a text to my friend Elisa, who had already seen the film, and she had been starting to tell me some stuff about it. And then she stopped herself because she realized I hadn't seen it. And I just said, when John M. Chu says this movie is in two parts, we collectively say, okay. And when he says, wait, we wait. You couldn't have gotten that movie in one film. It needed two films. It needed the expansiveness that he was able to put into those two movies. Brilliant. Okay, I said last week I saw it with myself and I got home and Martin told me to record a voice memo of me sharing my reaction with him. So here's that voice memo.
I was sitting there thinking about how so many movies right now are just seem so aligned for the moment we're in, for the authoritarianism and the fascism, like they are speaking to it. And I was trying to figure out now, are these things? Is it just that artists have this sort of predictive mind of where humanity is going, and that it just seems so incredibly accurate. But then the other thing, I was like, well, maybe all of this stuff is always just happening. It's just always happening to some extent or another. But this moment just seems incredibly filthy with it, disgustingly, grossly filthy with it. And so it's spectacular. It really, like, the storytelling is, that storytelling, but then also the how he incorporated the um the Tin Man and the Lion and the Scarecrow and Dorothy, like how, I mean, I know how that those characters who are in it already become them, but how they became them, how the Wicked Witch of the East becomes the Wicked Witch of the East and is killed, by Dorothy's house. All of that, like, it's just how he brought that all together is, I mean, and I'm sure the writers, it was a collaborative effort. I'm sure it's brilliant. And then also, I loved, like, the scene, like the costumes, which they feel like they're 1930s. They feel like they are Gilded Age. They from some of the silhouettes are Gilded Age. Other silhouettes are the 20s. Other silhouettes are the 30s, and other silhouettes seem like they might even be like 19th century, like, and earlier 19th century, and it's all like it all comes together in like this very timeless story of this fantastical place. Also, like the architecture, I was thinking about how, like, the Emerald City is sort of like, mm, what is that style of the Empire State Building?
Art Deco.
The Art Deco. Like Emerald City feels Art Deco, and how maybe also in The Wizard of Oz it also felt Art Deco, but then how The Wiz you don't get, like, Art Deco is downtown, The Wiz is uptown. They're in Harlem. She gets swept up in the blizzard in Harlem, at least in the movie. And it's a storm in the musical. But how they don't go downtown. So you see like the grungy. So it's all like representative of at least the movies of New York City. And, New York City as a character, but also New York City, I feel like is really truly a character in The Wiz because it's literally set in New York City. Like she lives in Harlem and is basically afraid to go downtown. That's the story in the movie. The musical is different, but what I think that what people associate with The Wiz is really the movie, not the stage show. Most people probably haven't seen the stage show. But everybody knows that movie. And how there's this one moment where it feels like they are not in the ghetto. Even when she even when she gets to Oz, Oz is still ghetto, because she's never escaped. She's never been anywhere else. So all she knows is the ghetto. So even her fantasies are the ghetto. Like there's something really quite profound about that idea. There's one moment in the movie where they ease on down the road across one of the bridges, and that's like the most pristine picture of New York that I think you get in that movie. Elphaba is a superhero. That first scene, her on the broom, her standing on the broom and riding it. She's a whole superhero. Like the cape and everything. How she looked. So good. So good. Ariana Grande. Lord have mercy. Ha! The vocal evolution of Aria of Glinda in part 2 is insane. How you get this person who on the outside, the facade is perfection. The voice is perfection. Like she is tonally classical. Also, that which is that kind of pristine we think of classical as being like the pinnacle. And then she's white and she's blonde and that the and that's also, when you see the musical, I think that is because Adina as Elphaba was rock. She was a rock sounding, pop sounding Elphaba, and Glinda is this classical, legit sound. And I feel like in the musical, Glinda never loses that legit sound. But in the movie, how she slips out of that perfection is perfection. It is absolutely perfection when she starts riffing and there's a little grit and soul in her voice. Oh my God, I lost it. I completely lost it in that moment. It was so, like, I was sitting there laughing, but also crying because it was just so brilliant. It was really amazing. If John M. Chu says, wait, we wait. You don't ask any questions. That man knew what he was doing. Oh my God. Wow.
So you kind of liked it.
Yes.
Beautiful.
I've heard people complain about Michelle Yeoh and Jeff Goldblum singing. I didn't even notice their singing. I don't think they're supposed to sing well. They're terrible people, so singing well would endear the audience to them, in my opinion. I think casting not good singers who were phenomenal actors was intentional. There's a kind of realism that gets played in musical films that is different than in musical theater, where I think the focus is the music. It is the singing. In films, the focus is really the acting. You have the obvious singers to do the heavy lifting of singing, who are also phenomenal actors, but Characters like the Wizard and Madame Morrible and even Dr. Dillerman, they don't need beautiful voices. They need great acting. Unless the singing is unique. I might get in trouble for this. Unique like Patti LuPone. Patti LuPone sings well, and I know she's kind of canceled at the moment, but hear me out. Patti LuPone sings well, but her voice, in my opinion, is not pretty. It's a little strident. You know, I'm thinking other actors who could have played this role, like Lucille Ball as Morrible, Carol Burnett, Elaine Stritch, B. Arthur. You get where I'm going. Voices like that. I'm definitely getting in trouble for this. Patti LuPone has been real quiet since that New Yorker article. I didn't read it. Did you? Okay, I just paused and read it. The link for the article is in the show notes. You know those people who seem like they're only happy when there's chaos or when they're fighting with someone or against something. After reading the article, I think that's who Patti LuPone is. One thing that's so disgusting in this article, though, is the writer Michael Schulman interviewed several people for the article, including Kevin Kline. But there's this one person who is introduced as simply an Evita chorus boy, then is chorus boy for the remainder of the article. That person gave Michael Schulman their time and memories of Patti LuPone, and the article couldn't even honor him with his name. And it doesn't say he didn't want his name in the article. The title is Patti LuPone is Done with Broadway and Almost Everything Else. What a way to go out. She is probably not done with Broadway. Speaking of Broadway, I was so close to seeing Wicked on Broadway this weekend. I'm talking, I had tickets for seats in the orchestra for the Saturday matinee. Then life did what life does, and I had to give those tickets away. Couldn't even sell them. I'll see it eventually. And speaking of Wicked Broadway, let's wrap up Act 2. Here's what would have been last week's episode. As we're settling in after intermission, don't forget to follow Dark Mondays on social media. That's at Dark Mondays Pod on Instagram and TikTok. Here we go. Now, Act 2 is packed full, so I might skip some things, but you'll get the gist. Act 2 picks up with the citizens of Oz seeing a reprise of No One Mourns the Wicked downstage of the curtain, and the lyrics are ominous and foreboding. It's obvious a fear of Elphaba, who has been branded the Wicked Witch, has been instilled in them. We see just how fast a narrative can spin. The propaganda machine is propaganda-ing. The curtain rises on Glinda at a mic, proclaiming a day of celebration, which is a thing these regimes do when the capital is crumbling around them. They have military parades and construct ballrooms. Basically, they try to distract us with opulence and constant proclamations of victory over this and that. Glinda is flanked by Fiyero and Madame Morrible, who, to Fiero's surprise, announces the engagement of Fiyero and Glinda. Fiyero goes along, but it's kind of obvious he doesn't want to marry Glinda, and also obvious he's struggling with the official story that's been cooked up about Elphaba. Elphaba goes home to try to get help from her father, the governor of Munchkinland, but we learn from Nessa Rose that their father died of shame over Elphaba, and Nessa Rose is now the governor. All the Munchkin's rights, including Bach's, have been restricted. He is essentially Nessa Rose's slave. Elphaba performs a spell on Nessa Rose that allows her to walk, and Bach sees this as his opportunity to leave and go be with Glinda, who he says he lost his heart to the moment he first saw her. Angry, Nessa Rose performs a spell on Bach to shrink his heart, and Elphaba steps in to fix it, which is how the Tin Man comes to be. Wild. Elphaba flies off to the Emerald City to confront the wizard, and he admits he's mediocre and pleads his case for why he is the way he is. Elphaba calls him a liar, and he tells her he told the people what they wanted to hear, that the citizens of Oz needed someone to believe in. He says the truth is not a thing of fact or reason, it's just what everyone agrees on. Those lines, lyrics, they're from his song Wonderful, sound like they're right out of the mouths of our politicians. The wizard invites Elphaba to join his side, and she agrees on the condition that he set the monkeys free, which he does. There's some cool flying monkey choreography on the ground and in the air. Then Dr. Dillerman stumbles out, and it's clear he's been caged. He can no longer talk. This sends Elphaba into a rage. The wizard calls for the guards, and they show up with Fiyero, who has been promoted to captain of the guard. Fiyero decides to flee with Elphaba. Glinda is devastated and tells Madame Morrible and the wizard to use Nessa Rose to lure Elphaba into capture. Back in Elphaba's hideout, she and Fiyero proclaim their love to each other in As Long As You're Mine. At the end of the song, Elphaba tells Fiyero, "For the first time in my life, I feel wicked." I love that line. And I don't think she means evil or unholy, although sex, which we can assume they just had, is often labeled unholy or sinful as a tool of control. I think she means mischievous, playful, sexy. This moment reminds me of Too Beautiful for Words from The Color Purple. Both Elphaba and Seeley have been ostracized and basically told they're ugly their entire life. Then the most beautiful, alluring person in the world tells them they're beautiful. It's life-changing. It's life-affirming. Both narratives have this romantic love combined with sisterly love, Elphaba for Glinda and Seeley for her long-lost sister Nettie, that is transformative for both characters. The Color Purple will definitely be an episode at some point. Elphaba senses something is wrong with Nessa Rose and flies off to Munchkinland, where she finds Glinda paying respects to Nessa Rose, who has died by House, Dorothy's house, caught up in a storm whipped up by Madame Morrible and dropped on her. Elphaba and Glinda square off in a fight, and then Emerald City guards show up and seize Elphaba. Fiyero swings in on a rope. He has a gun, the guards have spears. Elphaba flees, but the guards seize Fiyero. Elphaba tries to perform a spell to rescue him, but it turns him into the Scarecrow. It's like Trauma is an unofficial character in Wicked. Elphaba decides if the world insists she's wicked, she'll stop trying to prove otherwise. She proclaims, "So be it. So be it then. Let all Oz be agreed I'm wicked through and through," and promises no good deed will she attempt to do ever again. No Good Deed is the song for me. I like Defying Gravity, and I think it's a great Act 1 closer. But if I had to choose between the two songs that are Elphaba's big character shift moments, I'd choose No Good Deed. I guess it would also be her 11 o'clock number. So Glinda confronts Madame Morrible about the storm that killed Nessa Rose, then goes to Elphaba, who has captured Dorothy. She tells Elphaba she wants to tell everyone the truth, but Elphaba makes her promise not to. Elphaba gives Glinda the Grimoire and tells her now it's up to her to change the system. The two women sing the emotional reckoning that is for good, where they contend with how their lives have been forever altered by knowing each other. Elphaba draws a curtain to shield Glinda from what's about to happen, and from the front of the curtain, Glinda and the audience are witnesses to Dorothy melting the Wicked Witch of the West with a bucket of water. We learn the wizard is actually Elphaba's biological father, which again, Trauma is an unofficial character in Wicked. That's therapy for another day. Glinda returns to Oz and confronts the wizard and tells him he must leave Oz immediately. Now, if only being afraid of the truth would send the authoritarians packing in our world. Hello, Epstein Files. Madame Morrible is thrown into prison. We discover Elphaba faked her own death and she escapes Oz with Fiyero. No magical powers, Glinda floats above Oz in her bubble, now wiser and lonelier, wearing a smile that suddenly feels a lot heavier. And she becomes the leader of Oz. The citizens declare no one mourns the wicked over Glinda and Elphaba singing Because I Knew You. I have been changed for good. We see Elphaba and Fiyero slip away into an abyss, and the curtain falls on a world reshaped by a girl who was born a little different and who dared to question the man behind the curtain. The end. Act 2 of Wicked is where the fairy tale drops its mask and shows us the machinery, the power structures, the propaganda, and the price that's paid for refusing to play along. By this point in the story, Elphaba isn't running from the wizard. She's running from a narrative written about her, without her, and in direct contradiction to her truth. And that is where the show stops being a revisionist Oz fantasy and becomes a quiet political parable, one that feels particularly modern. Elphaba's journey becomes a study in how systems criminalize those who resist them. The wizard uses fear-mongering, Madame Morrible uses political messaging masquerading as weather, and Oz itself uses the language of safety to justify silencing and surveillance. The personal becomes political, not because Elphaba wanted a revolution, but because speaking the truth made her a threat. What Wicked does brilliantly is ask us to consider who gets called wicked and who gets to stay good, not based on morality, but on visibility, likability, and usefulness to the dominant narrative, usefulness to the system. It's an indictment of the way the marginalized are rewritten into villains when their power can't be contained. Wicked remains a modern Broadway myth because it understands something our world keeps proving. Villains are often heroes written from the perspective of the powerful. And in a time when women, queer people, Black people, trans people, and anyone living outside the center are increasingly mislabeled as threats, Wicked hits differently. It's about survival. It's about resistance. It's about reclaiming your own narrative, even if the only way to do that is to burn the story down and start again. Do you remember the controversy last year with the poster for the Wicked film? Here's a short recap. I'm going to try and describe the images as I go, but you can pull them up for visual reference. First, let's look at the musical's key art, which became instantly recognizable global branding. In the foreground, Elphaba, dressed in black with the iconic pointy hat, smirking as a white-adorned Glinda whispers into her ear. Elphaba's hair is blowing in the wind, and in the background are winged monkeys flying like vultures in a sickly green sky. Glinda appears to also be wearing a hat. Notice also how Glinda's hand covers her face and Elphaba's chin is tucked. Her head is down, so we don't see her eyes. It almost looks like she's getting some juicy tea from Glinda. Enter the film's key art, and I'm talking about the first film. There are obvious similarities in terms of the composition, and it's clear the art team were giving a nod to the iconic musical poster. Like I said, there was instantly recognizable global branding from the artwork with all kinds of branded products sold worldwide, and no doubt the film was banking on similar franchise success. But then there are key differences to the posters. The musical artwork is an illustration while the film is a portrait. And in the musical, we don't see Elphaba's eyes. They're obscured by her hat. Whereas in the portrait, we do see her eyes. She is, in fact, looking directly at us. So the controversy came when fans did what fans do. They created fan art. And I think actors are usually flattered by fan art. I know I have been flattered when I received fan art. But there was one piece, a piece that made the film poster more similar to the original poster, that got under Cynthia's skin. And she responded to it in an Instagram story saying, "This is the wildest, most offensive thing I have seen, equal to that awful AI of us fighting, equal to people posting the question, is your green? None of this is funny. None of it is cute. It degrades me. It degrades us. The original poster is an illustration. I am a real life human being who chose to look right down the barrel of the camera to you, the viewer, because without words, we communicate with our eyes. Our poster is an homage, not an imitation. To edit my face and hide my eyes is to erase me, and that is just deeply hurtful. You can see a screenshot of the Instagram story and read an article about the controversy on The Hollywood Reporter, link in the show notes. Cynthia addressed the controversy in an interview with Gayle King for Oprah Daily. At the time, she said it's such a big project, she didn't know if they'd put it in her hands. She'd never seen anyone who looked like her play the role on the stage, so she didn't think they were looking for a her, which I interpreted to mean not looking for a Black woman. She went on to say she was protective of the character and the work that had been done, and protective of the artist who worked on the poster. And that all made sense to me. I've never made a film, but I've made theater as both an actor and a choreographer and director. And creating a show is hard work. It's physically exhausting and emotionally draining, and there's so much of your life you have to sacrifice. And when you're doing it right, you're pouring all of yourself into the work for weeks, sometimes months, to create something that has soul and integrity. And you become very protective of it and of the people you collaborated with in crafting the work. Cynthia's Instagram story had some pushback from fans, and she told Gayle King she was just having a human moment and probably should have phoned a friend. Now, here's my take on it. First of all, nothing but absolute love and respect for Cynthia Erivo. She is enormously talented and refreshingly thoughtful. Also, I do not know Cynthia Erivo. I met her once backstage during her Color Purple run. She actually didn't perform the night I saw the show. I went backstage to say hello to folks I knew in the show and was surprised when I ran into her. And she was lovely and apologetic about not being on. But that's the only interaction I've ever had with her. So anything I say is pure speculation based on things I've learned being around the business. When the casting was announced for Wicked, there were complaints that Elphaba would be played by a Black actor. And we've seen this before. Think Rue in Hunger Games, even though in the book the character is described as having dark brown skin and dark brown eyes. Halle Bailey cast as the Little Mermaid. Folks boycotted the movie. Even the insinuation that Black British actor Idris Elba should be the next James Bond brought out the haters. And in episode 1 of Dark Mondays, I talked about Rachel Zegler as Snow White being criticized for not having skin as white as snow. Now, when an American film is released both domestically and internationally, sometimes the promotional poster is tweaked to appeal to the international markets. And I don't remember the film, but my brother told me early in his career that the powers that be didn't want to put his face on a poster for the international markets. Their argument being that films with Black stars don't do well internationally. They even cited several prominent Black actors over many years who had agreed to not have their face on the poster of the film they were the star of. But Chad knew, and he told them, until one of our faces is on the poster, it will never happen. And he would not sign off on the artwork. Now, he was an above-the-title actor, as is Cynthia Erivo. And when you're an above-the-title actor, you actually have some power. But that doesn't mean you don't still have to fight for what you believe in. And my speculation is that Cynthia Erivo possibly had to fight to have her full face on the poster. And again, it all makes sense. There haven't been a lot of big-budget films with Black female leads. Recently, there was The Little Mermaid. Halle Berry in Catwoman comes to mind. Angela Bassett, What's Love Got to Do with It? But both of those films, Catwoman and What's Love Got to Do with It, were decades ago, and neither were big budget films. The combined budget of both Wicked films is reportedly around $350 million, which I think is comparable to a big superhero movie. And when have we seen a Black woman lead a film of that scope? I'm not saying Black women haven't been the lead in films. They absolutely have, but those films haven't been superhero movie budget films until now. And Elphaba looked like a superhero in that opening scene of For Good. So think about this. All of the films I mentioned, What's Love Got to Do with It? Tina Turner, global rock star. Catwoman came out of the Batman universe. The Little Mermaid, classic Disney film based on a Hans Christian Andersen story. Wicked, adapted from Broadway musical, came out of the beloved Wizard of Oz universe. All of them with protagonists with well-established, built-in audiences that Hollywood producers are willing to take a risk casting a Black woman. I mean, Tina Turner had to be Black, but you know what I mean. And all of those actresses, incredibly talented, beautiful, smart Black women who could be the lead in all kinds of stories easily. And there are so many other Black actresses who haven't gotten the opportunity to lead a film. But again, I don't know Cynthia Erivo. This is just my hypothesis. Maybe there were no fights behind the scenes, and what she posted in that Instagram story is exactly what it was. I hope so. I hope she didn't have to fight to have her face on the poster. But what do you all think? As I mentioned, I still haven't seen Wicked on Broadway, but I have seen it twice. I was in London for a month in 2009, and I saw a bunch of shows on the West End, including Wicked. The actress Alexia Kadame was the full-time Elphaba, and I had seen Alexia as Nala in The Lion King on the West End a few years before, so I was excited to see her as Elphaba, and she was phenomenal. So I have only experienced Black women as Elphaba. And on next week's episode, I'm going behind the scenes with the enormously talented, Tony-nominated actress, singer, television and film star, Sekon Sangblo, who in 2005 became an Elphaba standby on Broadway, thus making her the first Black woman to play Elphaba. Here's a little snippet of that conversation.
Every one of those roles felt very natural to me. It felt very natural, felt like I'll tell you what, when I auditioned for Elphaba, there was another audition that I was for another show. I flew up to New York. I was living in Georgia at the time. I flew up to New York, and before I left, my agents were like, we'll focus on this one, and, maybe if you can learn a song or two for Wicked, And when I started looking at the Wicked music, and then I was looking at the music for this other thing, which who knows what the hell that was. I was like, I don't even want to audition for that. And my agents were looking at me like, no, catastrophe. No, make your trip worth it. Audition for everything. I said, either I'm going to learn all 4 of these Wicked songs and do them well.
And that's the show. Thank you so much for joining me. In episode 1, I said I'd be belting out my favorite song from Wicked in this episode, but I've had a little trouble figuring out how to get quality audio, so maybe next week. This episode of Dark Mondays with Kevin Bozeman was conceived, written, and produced by me. I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please give it a 5-star review and leave a comment on Apple Podcast. Dark Mondays with Kevin Bozeman can also be found on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. Please do share the podcast, share the socials. That's Dark Mondays Pod on both Instagram and TikTok. I'm at Kevin Bozeman on Instagram and at Kevin_Bozeman on TikTok. Have a wonderful week. See some theater, and I'll see you back here next Monday. kind of have this track record of being cast in these spaces where a Black actress, would not normally be cast. So
Mhm.
what do you think it is about you that has gotten you into those roles?
Nobody ever asked me that. Like, people always comment they'll say, wow, you were the first Black girl to do this. Or like, even with Mimi, like, I was just a darker skinned woman, and I was also more of voluptuous. A lot of the Mimis were like really tiny. And
Mhm.